Welcome. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Farmington School Board, tonight's work session. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. As always, the first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. The agenda's been out for a few days. I think we've all had a chance to look at it. Anyone have any items to add or discuss? The only item I have to discuss is whether or not, under work session topics, they're in the right order, that we should talk whether finance should be the first item and community engagement should be the second. Not a big deal. I just want to.
I think that could be helpful.
Yes.
From the, yeah.
Okay, then we will flip the two items in the work session discussion topics, and we will lead off with the finance and long-range planning. All in favor of approving can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Dettinger, second by Doyle. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have an agenda. All right, so in that, our first item on the agenda is Finance and Long-Range Planning Committee update for the 2022-2023 budget realignment target. Member Carrero and Member Doyle, take it away.
So I'm just gonna give like a quick 30 seconds to a minute, kind of update, and Jane put a nice PowerPoint presentation together, kind of, I think will summarize everything a little bit better. So we met on 10/3, which was 2 weeks ago, correct? It wasn't last week, was it?
It was last week.
It was last week.
2 weeks ago. So I went through the numbers again, and one thing that we noticed is we were being very conservative on the general education formula number. Originally, we said we wanted it at 1%. And typically, the last 6 years, it's averaged about 2% on there. So we decided, instead of being real conservative, we were gonna be a little more neutral conservative, if that's a phrase, and we came up with 1.5% on that to use on the formula. We're hoping to get 2% or a little bit more this year. The other part of it is we've spent a lot of time looking at the assigned and unassigned fund balance to see how much money we are willing to look at moving over or reallocating to help facilitate the deficit on that. And what we came up with is the assigned fund balance had 3.84 million in it, and the unassigned had roughly 7.98, and that's the balance we use between 8 and 10% that we try to keep as a district on that. So what we're recommended coming out of the finance committee is using $1.9 million out of our assigned fund balance to help offset the deficit. So that would bring it down to a $5 million budget alignment for the target of 2022 or 2023, 2024. And I will let or if you have anything to say that too. The other part of it is we have another meeting on 10/26 as a finance committee meeting. And what we're looking to get out of that meeting is really talking with the administrations for looking at realignments and stuff within that for that $5 million. How we can do that.
Maybe this will be answered in Jane's presentation, but when you say $5 million budget alignment target, is that the total projected deficit, or is that the total projected cuts after the use of the assigned fund balance that we need to deal with?
After the use of the 1.9 million. Good question.
Okay.
I think we'll answer it more if we can put that up.
We're working on it.
We're working on it. It's going, so. You want to give a little bit, we can give
Yeah.
a little history while we're.
Yeah, so, like Steve said, that we met on October 3rd and talked about a lot of different parameters. We had some really good conversation back and forth. There was a lot of what ifs, because, at this time of year, there is a bunch of what ifs. But as we went through the process, we'll talk tonight about the reviewing of the data points, the data that we use to go into the model. We'll talk about some of the model outcomes, the conversation we had around fund balance, and then what we ultimately are going to recommend for our budget alignment target for the 23-24 school year. So some of the things that we talked about, right, again, was about what is long-range planning, what does it mean? At this point, we're getting in the ball game, right? As we walk through this, we came up with a target. It could be plus or minus that, right, at this point. But it's the best estimate that we have at this time with the information that we have. And then we talked about our fund balance, just a review of our fund balance. And it is that we would have an 8 to 12% balance in our unassigned. And that has been our policy for quite a few years. And so we talked about that and how that could affect us as well. And as we went on, like Steve said, we did talk about the Gen Education aid. Now, we were talking about being very conservative, right? The question was asked, like, what do districts typically estimate? And especially this year, they usually estimate 0 because they have nothing from the legislature. But looking and having conversations, looking at the trend for the last, 6 years, it's been coming in at 2%. So we thought, well, let's be still a little conservative, because also remember, the legislature has billions of dollars in surplus. And so that was a really tough conversation to try to figure out, well, are we gonna put an estimate in for that? Are we not? How does that all play in? It could actually be a huge chip for our game. But at this time, we have no idea. As the board all knows, last spring, we thought for sure we were getting something anticipated, put something in the budget, and we got nothing.
Oh, keep going.
Oh, so as we walked through this, we decided and landed on, as a committee, at 1.5% for the Gen Ed formula that we were going to use at this time.
I think a couple of the things, we've talked about this before in different times, but the financing for schools is interesting because we really don't control any of our revenue other than what voters approve for us. And so we do depend on the state for a lot of that. When you look at this, 1%, 2%, you'll see when we get to some of our parameters, our inflationary rate is about 4.6% over the past, that's a 5-year average. And so you'll hear a lot that, that the per pupil funding doesn't keep up with inflation, and it hasn't. And so, that's one of the issues that districts face as they budget, is that kind of ongoing pressure that's put on of not being able to keep up with those type of things and not be able to really generate additional revenue unless you go out to voters, which a majority of school districts had. There was an article that they just shared today of the amount of money that has been shifted from the state to local taxpayers because of these very things. So it's just another piece to think about. And as we talked as a committee, it's great if we get 2%, but that's really not gonna do much in the overall grand scheme of things, especially when we look at our special ed cross subsidy and some of those other things. And even though we didn't take into account any of the surplus money, that'll be a big piece for our organizations to, again, try to advocate that, some of that money gets used to buy down that special ed cross subsidy, because anything that gets taken down off that automatically takes your $5 million alignment target and it reduces that moving forward and stuff. And so it's just a piece, we've talked about a lot, but to be aware of, again, that it's awesome, but 2% or 1% is like $1 million, which is good, but I mean, based on the hole that's been kind of dug through that special ed cross subsidy, it doesn't even come close to digging us out. So,
and the other thing, Jason shared an article today that was generated by a think tank, in that the actual funding that we receive for a student is actually 20% less since 2010, 3, something like that. It actually has gone down. We used to have a $13,000 per pupil, and it's down to 10 because of inflation eating it, right? So just other things to keep in mind as every district goes through this and we try to figure things out.
So just to underscore the importance of what you were just sharing, Jason, for our district, our special education cross subsidy is $8 million approximately, right? And if the legislature chose to use the surplus to fully fund that, we'd be looking at a surplus of, let's say, 3 million instead of an alignment of 5.
and the 8 million is probably low because that's 20,
Well,
it runs a year behind, so.
Okay.
well, it actually is high, But there's a weird reason why it is, right? Because the next year that came out is pandemic year 1.
Oh, that's right.
And then the next year after that is going to be pandemic year 2. So we will probably see in our cross subsidy 2 years that are lower, but that when that third year comes, it's going to be a huge jump. And it won't be just a huge jump for us, it'll be a huge jump for every district, because not only is it having your normal cross subsidy for, as you're providing all of your full services, you're gonna have those additional services that you provided as well. So it's going to be a very large number in a couple years. But we will have 2 years lower because it does lag, but it doesn't accurately reflect what we're actually experiencing today.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
And again, we've talked about this before, just another way to think about it is we generate about $4 million through our voter-approved levy. And so if it's 8, we use the number 8, right? That voter-approved levy pays for about half of what it doesn't even go to what it, because the things aren't covered by the state, so.
Thanks.
And the federal government.
Yep. So then we looked at our October 1 numbers. Now, please know these numbers are not finalized as of yet. Did some work with what's currently sitting out in our MAR system compared to what is sitting in campus, and did the estimate best that we could. So I do believe that our K-12 enrollment is gonna come very close to 6725, and that's where we projected it to be. And so as we looked at our enrollment from the past 5 years, from October 1 to year end, did we go up or down? And that's that first line there, that gain loss October 1. We've had a slight increase from our October 1 numbers till the end of the year. So I'm feeling comfortable that 6725. I'll feel even better at the end of October here when the numbers are going to be more finalized. But as of now, we're going to stick with 6725. If you can remember when we first talked about this, we were going to go down to 6700 for 23-24. And as a group, we decided that we're just going to leave it at 6725 and leave it flat and see what happens here as we go through the school year. If we need to make any adjustments, we will.
Just another side note, because this has come up in various times. There's nothing special about the October 1st deadline. There's misnomers out there that we get funded. There's a small percentage of funding that we do receive, but our funding is based on our end of year enrollment. I'm not quite sure where October 1st kind of came from, but you can see it does give us a pretty good indicator of where we might be, but there's no magic number, like you get paid on this other than just a small piece of things, so.
Yep. And so as we looked at our projection model and were trying to figure out a baseline, right? We needed to get a baseline, like if we take the most conservative approach, if we use enrollment at 6,700, if we put 0 and 0 on the Gen N formula, we use the past 5-year averages on all of our other related costs, and we don't touch our assigned and unassigned fund balance, where are we gonna end up? How is it going to look? And on there for 23-24, you can see that we will be short $8 million. Okay?
And this is one of the scenarios, if you remember back, that Jane had fun names for them all. This is not fun to talk about, but she had a name for this, so this would be kind of.
Falling.
Yeah, sky is falling, worst case scenario, and we put this in here just to give us a baseline of what it would look like on the super conservative end of things, so.
So then we went into the conversation about our assigned and unassigned fund balance. And just to kind of let you know, assigned fund balance, money is set aside for a specific purpose. So there's money in a separate, I always call them savings accounts. It's easy for people to understand that. And within that unassigned, there's also sub-accounts in there. So if you happen to look at our UFAR submission, which is out on MDE, you'll see our unassigned fund, our assigned fund balance is like $9 million, right? But we do not have access to all of that. Some of it is set in statute that we have to set aside in that assigned fund balance that we can't touch because it has to be used for specific purposes. And then there's other money that we do have access to that we can use for the purposes that we set it in there. And that's roughly the 3.8 that Steve had mentioned earlier. And then we talked about the unassigned, and unassigned is just the money, right, that falls to the bottom of your checking account, right? So that's what your unassigned balance is. And we roughly have $7.9 million sitting in there, which equates currently to about 8.94%. And our fund balance policy is 8 to 12. Now, the thing to remember is if we don't add anything more to our unassigned fund balance, as our expenditures continue to grow, that percentage is gonna shrink, right? So we had that conversation about how important it is to stay within the board policy. You know, do we wanna have further conversations about it? Honestly, it was a great conversation.
And to Jane's point, I think that is why when we started bringing this up for people to understand is even though it's 8.9 and our goal is between 8 and 12, that these other factors that could bring it down to that 8% or below if we do touch that dollar amount. That's why we said, you know, we'll do 1.5 being on the conservative factor. And we'll look at using that money from the assigned fund balance on it. So that was the different, kind of the deciding factor in discussion of this.
Yep. And maybe it would help to just revisit or re-talk about why we have an unassigned fund balance and why it's important to maintain 8 to 12% of our budget, right?
Yeah, so the reason, well, let's talk about the 1.9 in the assigned fund balance. We have been sitting aside as a district since the 2015 passed. And our whole goal was to make it 10 years, because that's what we told the community we were going to be able to do. And as a district, as an administration, we truly believe we would have made it 10 years if we didn't have the pandemic. That really took a hit on us. That 1.9 that we will be using out of the assigned will wipe that assigned fund balance out for maintaining class sizes. So that will go down to 0. But it's there for that purpose, right? And so the committee felt comfortable using, that's why we set it aside. That's why we planned. You know, we really tried to have, be proactive in setting money aside and making sure when something like this happens, we have the funds available. And the unassigned fund balance, you know, 8 to 12% when you're really looking at that, you know, $7.9 million, if you're out in industry, you know, they want you to have 6 months in your savings account for your rainy day assigned fund, unassigned fund balance, whatever you might want to say. And we're not even there yet. But I also think if you're to ask me, yeah, there's that balancing act between, is it too much or is it not enough? Right? And so you have to have those conversations and figure out what is that tipping point? And really, I think the 8 to 12% is really comfortable for a district. I shouldn't say really comfortable. It's comfortable for a district, even though you should have more than that in your unassigned fund balance.
Yeah, and I think we have to kind of keep part of the conversation that we shared during the superintendent update. You know, what is, you know, you asked what is the assigned fund balance for, right? I mean, you're talking roofs, boilers, big things that you don't have. Now, we've been fortunate with being able to take care of a lot of those kind of things that quote unquote may be unanticipated with some of that 2015 bond money. So that helps a little bit, but there's always things, you know, just like any homeowner that might just come out of nowhere that you didn't budget and you got to make sure that you use and you want to put aside and stuff like that. And so that's the piece that you use and kind of keep track of. So.
Yeah, thanks.
So with all of those parameters and all of those conversations, the committee landed with keeping enrollment constant at 6725, with putting 1.5 and 1.5 on the Gen Ed formula, using the past 5 years averages for all other related costs, and using 1.9 million in the assigned fund balance. And then you can see for your 23-24, we're looking at an alignment of 5.18 or, $5.2 million. And as a committee, that is what we would like to bring forward for the board to have conversations on and to provide us any guidance for us to start building what we're gonna do. Any questions, concerns?
Jane, can you walk us through why, so every year we do this, right? Every year we have this part of the budget alignment to our expenses and costs. Can you walk us through why, what are some of the factors that are influencing why this year is a little larger or bigger than some other, than kind of our routine previous years?
I think there's probably 5 different reasons why this is become an issue, not only for us, but for a lot of districts, right? So you can talk about the pandemic, right? Whoever knew that we are gonna have a pandemic and all the different related costs that you're gonna have with that. You talk about all of the federal money that all of the districts received, and you'd be like, well, why is that an issue? Well, it's an issue because, one, first of all, I should always say, we're very thankful for the money. I don't want to sound ungrateful or anything like that. Very thankful for the money. But what it did is we kicked the can down the road because we probably should have been making cuts when we didn't, because we were in a pandemic and we were concerned for children and their learning and their mental health and everything that goes along with that, and trying to keep it as, I'll use air quotes, normal as possible for students to get back in and whatnot. And then you have inflation, right? Inflation took a big hit for everybody, not just school districts. And then by not doing your budget adjustments when you should have, you have a compounding factor, right? So if we should have done $1 million cut last year or 2 years ago, but we backfilled it with federal dollars, the next year it's $2 million because it was the $1 million previously and it's the $1 million currently. And then, right, our enrollment. So those are kind of, if you were to ask me, like the 5 factors that is bringing us to where we are today, not pointing at a finger at anyone or anything like that. It's just what happened.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful.
I think one thing to note too, to your point, is I think each year you got to evaluate the percentage you want to keep there between 8 and 12, because we changed the parameters 6 years ago, to keep an eye on that, because it used to be lower than that, just to see. So each year I would suggest, since I'm an outgoing board member, to keep an eye on that, because you really want to see what's going on out there with inflation and everything, so.
When you guys made the change, Steve, to increase it from whatever it was it because of factors like this that it felt like there wasn't enough, and so the board?
Yeah, we had somebody on at that time that was pretty well, I would say, finance savvy. And we talked through it with assistance from Jane at that time. And it was one of those, well, we should and we shouldn't, I think it was maybe 2 or 3% change. And we felt it in best interest of the district for taxpayers to move the needle a little bit to 8% to 12%.
Got it.
So thank God we did.
Yeah.
On that. And I'm not saying to go from now 10 to 15 either,
Right,
but I'm
right.
just saying it's something you just want to evaluate
Keep
every
an eye
year.
on.
Yeah, we need to go back a long ways. Jen and I were just talking, there was a time where the amount of money in the unassigned fund balance was like below $500,000 in the district. And so through different processes and things like that, there was a targeted approach to build that back up. So, there's lots of things at play with that number and what people are comfortable with and different things, but I don't remember.
It was out, when I came in 2004, let's just say it was not even close to 5 days worth of expenditures.
So the boards, the boards through that process have done a lot of work to rebuild that and get it up to what's considered in school districts a healthy fund balance. And at the same time also built up that assigned fund balance through that levy to carry us through, so.
And I think some of the myth is we're hoarding the money, we're keeping it in an account, we can't use it for certain things, which is true, but remember, the taxpayers gave us it, so we gotta be fiscally responsible for that, is the way we looked at it.
Yeah, I think the point that you just raised about the taxpayers understanding about this, right, has a big impact because we've talked about this a little bit, but I know we've talked about the importance of keeping it top of mind and continuing to explain it, that while we have a significant budget alignment, and it can feel very conflicting to see that we're building new things at the football field, right? And that goes back to what Jason talked about, how much of this is statute mandated and how if districts were able to have their income and direct it where it was most needed, we as a district would have a lot more discretion to spend it as needed, but those dollars could only be used for that type of project and had to be used before we lost the opportunity to, so.
I think your point, that's something every year you got to reiterate that, because I still get questions, with the football stadium, we built the bathrooms and this and that money could have went to this deficit. Well, no, it couldn't have. And people understanding, it's not an easy explanation.
Right.
But Jane does a better job than the rest of us explaining it. But again, reiterating that every year, this time of the year to the taxpayers, so.
And I think another thing that you shared previously, Jane, that's helped me with my understanding a lot is just how much the legislature timeline impacts ours, because it doesn't line up when we have to do our budgets, right? We have to have these conversations now with an ultimately approved budget for the next school year by June. The legislature starts meeting in February, maybe really gets moving on some bills March, April, if we're lucky, before they conclude session in May. And as we saw last year, there might be special sessions or certain things that get called, but districts can't rely on that as part of our planning process. So we have to go through all of this as if this is the reality or will be. And I just appreciate the time that the finance committee spent working together and running all the different scenarios so that we could have a leg up when we started the conversation tonight.
And
I was just gonna say, it's not an easy discussion, because when you're talking about it, it's people.
Right,
Right? I mean, people need to realize that.
yeah.
And when you look at the legislature, when you talk about timelines, right, that some of that stuff is self-inflicted because they've really moved to this omnibus bill where they put everything in the bill and the bill doesn't move forward, where they could pass a funding part, a policy part and things. And again, whether we have impact or not, that will be another thing that our superintendent group really pushes on. If you are going to do anything with the surplus, there's no I mean, in theory, they've already come to an agreement of a target for that. There'd be no reason that should change, in theory. They could cut in session, that could get done in January, February. And that, again, if they did anything, which we already took the risk once, we're not gonna take it again. But if they did anything and that happens in January, February, again, that potentially changes the discussion. Now, I'm not trying to give people false hope, but there are things that we can try to do to advocate, because if they follow the traditional timeline, it is very, very problematic, because most of the time that stuff that gets done at the very last moment or it goes into a special session. And to your point, we have to have a budget done in June.
The thing to be careful about when saying they made an agreement, that was a different cast of characters than will be there in January next year, right? I mean, there could be some pretty significant changes in who's there to make agreements.
Yep.
So I only say that because I fully agree with the approach you all took. You can't take anything for granted, and even even wishing for 2% or 1.5% is a gamble. I think that there could be some pretty dynamic changes in St. Paul. No matter who holds which part, right? That's sort of immaterial, but the reality is, it would not be wise to assume that an agreement made last January or last April would hold in January 2023. I think we're in a pretty unfortunate situation. Thanks for also walking through the explanations about the impact of inflation. Some of that is probably a little self-inflicted over the years too, given how much we do control over some of the expenses that we negotiate. So I think but this does really set the right stage, I think, for having, I guess, next level discussions. One thing I kind of want to be clear about is the use of the word alignment. alignment means cuts, right? I mean, is there another way to achieve alignment than reductions?
Possibly,
Okay.
right? I mean, one of the things that the committee, I shouldn't speak for the committee, but I will because you know me. So one of the things that we talked about, right, is we knew that we had the 1.9 million of the assigned fund balance that was targeted to be able to maintain things that you had in place. And so we thought, hey, it made sense to continue to use that. There are other things that are available. Now, whether we advocate for using them or not, I think that depends, but it is possible that that $5 million is not all through reductions. I think that's a conversation the board is gonna have to have, and I think part of the discussion the committee has when they get back in our next meeting at the end of October, right? Put a guiding change document together, because we haven't done that yet, you know, put it around what does that look like, and then start to cultivate some different things so that we can, again, present to the board at some point in time, you know, what some of those things are, and then what are some opportunities that you could access additional dollars. And that would be potentially some additional money that are in assigned fund balances. That is an option the board could choose, or to what the discussion was, could choose to use some of the money that is in the unassigned fund balance. So I think the committee's thought is to begin to look at it is, we've already brought it down by 1.9 million, right? Now start to look at what does reductions of 5 million look like, and then entertain the discussion of, do you offset that and align it with some of those additional monies, and a decision the board will have to make at some point in time.
And I think,
So I guess I don't, it's possible, right? But I think, you know.
But I think at the end of the day, you've got a pie this big.
Yep.
And we can rearrange slices, sizes of slices, but the pie didn't change in volume or size, right?
but I think one thing we gotta be very clear on is we don't wanna sit here, it's a fact we're in a deficit, 100%. Everybody needs to understand that. That's reality, the world we live in today. Secondly, we don't wanna scare our staff on this thing. So, I mean, we're trying to do our best as a finance committee to Jason's point on that. He'll talk about it eloquently more than I can. That's why I'll have him speak about it. But alignment and cuts, you are 100% correct. But again, I don't want to come out of here with now our staff running to Jason saying, oh my God, we're going to have all these cuts, $5 million in cuts. We don't know yet. We're not saying that.
Thank you.
Yep, so.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, Steve, just about the human side of this,
Yep.
right? Because anything that we do impacts our staff and our learners, you know, to a degree, especially when we're talking about something this size. And we don't want to, we would be remiss not to talk about that and how that impacts
Yep.
the culture in our workplace and our, you know, our community too.
And again, we're all doing our best to come up with solutions to it, but I think people really need to understand that we are in a deficit. I think people don't really believe that or hear it. I mean, we're living it, and that's what kind of concerns me a little bit in the community. I don't think people understand that. So,
That's why I really appreciate the explanation of the factors, because it's one thing I think that the board before we came on and since too prides itself in and is prioritizing fiscal discipline, and the district does as well. You know, we consistently receive awards for financial excellence, and this board has always had that as a priority. As long as I've lived in the community, I've been paying attention. So it can feel difficult to understand, well, how have we, you know, how have we gotten here? How have we been disciplined and manage this well and still be facing this? And it's you can do all of the right things and have all of these other factors that have led to the situation we're faced with today.
well, to your point,
into
there's
next
been no
year.
mismanagement of money.
Right.
Jane,
So
to
that's what I mean.
exactly.
Yes.
We wouldn't have gotten all these or Jane, not we, Jane wouldn't have gotten all these accolades, to your
Right.
point. And I think needs to be very well said on that.
Yeah.
And just like every district throughout the state of Minnesota, across the country, right? I mean, enrollment dropped about 3 to 5%, and we did not make the corresponding reductions to that. We knew that coming out of that we needed to ensure that we had the supports in place and things like that, and it just, that wasn't regardless, that wasn't the right time to do it based on the needs of our learners, and that is a big piece, because ultimately, you'd like to step these things in.
Yep,
And slowly build
incrementally.
them in as you reduce your services and things like that, and, you know, I mean, based on all the other factors, we just didn't believe that that was the right time to do that.
No, I
And that
agree,
puts
and I
it-
think our
to Jane's
community would
point,
too.
it puts you in that compounding position, which is where no district wants to be.
But you can Monday morning quarterback everything right now at this point of what coulda, shoulda, and I still, the decision that we made was correct,
Was the right one,
Yeah.
yeah, completely.
so.
Is there any other discussion on this? It feels like we've talked it through. So what are next steps? I think maybe that's the question. What are next steps and what's the timeline we should maybe start thinking about between now and I guess the end of the year?
So our next meeting is the 26th of this month. We're gonna sit down and talk about, different, you know, alignments and stuff like Jason mentioned. We're gonna go through different options and stuff, and then bring that back to the board in November. So,
At the work session?
yes, that's our goal.
We'll bring back some additional information at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not gonna be finalized, correct,
Yeah,
correct.
I think we'll look at, I think the idea would be around the guiding change document, so the board has an understanding of, you know, what is the you know, kind of what are the things that we're looking at? What are we gonna try to, what lens are we gonna use as we begin that process and stuff?
Would we be making decisions yet this year, or is this gonna fall? I'm asking this for a reason, right?
Yep.
Because we're gonna have a
Yep.
3-member shift here in January. And so, you know, we've got a few of the candidates here in the audience, and get smart
Yeah, I don't
on this
think we're,
stuff really quick,
my
so.
personal opinion is I don't think we would be in a position to begin, I mean, as much as this board's done all the work, I just don't think the stuff that's gonna go into it, I don't think we're gonna be in a position, because there's gonna have to be some, I think, some serious in-depth discussions around what are the potential impacts of different scenarios, and look at
Correct.
each of those, because a lot of times you say, well, we could reduce A, okay? And on the surface, yeah, it makes sense, but then you start to say, well, if A is no longer available, whatever that is, who picks
the
up
ripple
A,
effect.
right? Where does A, you know, where do those things, you know, come to and fall to? And make sure that, right, we try to do it as best we can and not have some unintended things that come up down the road. So I think it's gonna take some time to dig into.
And refresh my memory, we need to pass a budget by
Yeah.
April 30th, correct?
June 30th.
But there are decisions that need to be made in
There's
April.
timelines.
Right.
Oh, yeah, so there's staffing decisions and whatnot, and we usually will put that calendar together in January, so you guys, we can let you know by such and such a date, you know, we do staffing and all of that stuff. We'll have that calendar together by mid-January.
I just don't want anyone who's listening in to think that this is a long, I mean, this is gonna be longer than 2 months, but it's not longer than 6, right?
Yep.
But I think to Jason's comment, we did talk about that with the changing of the guard and stuff, but my goal as an outgoing board member is to have stuff built to pass this on. Because we can't just, you know, Jacqueline's on, I'm not just gonna say, here you go, Jacqueline, it's yours to deal with. The goal of it, when we discuss this, is to have a plan in place before I
Yes.
exit,
And,
so.
and I know we've never really had to get to this point. This is significantly earlier than we've ever had these
Right.
discussions. Usually they begin, you know, we start having some preliminary conversations with our admin team in June, or I'm sorry, January, too many J's, and go through there. So we are purposely trying to get ahead of everything so we can be very thoughtful about this. And we've talked about this before as we went through this last year, right? There's nothing that isn't important to somebody in our district, right? I mean, our number one goal is to provide and support learning, but the reality is there's so many other things that people connect to in the district that are outside of that, that people find value in and are passionate about. And it's gonna be really difficult not to touch some of those things.
All right, so thank you for those last questions. I guess that brings us to our next item. If I can make my computer wake up again. It's a Community Engagement Committee update. Engagement strategies around budget realignment and levy referendum. So actually, Jason's last comments are probably a decent segue to that.
So I'll kick us off, and Sue, Andrew, Lisa, and all of the admin team, feel free as we dive into this discussion. So I will start with the budget realignment. And Jason, you can feel free to pull that up if it would be helpful, but everybody had it linked in the packet too, or in Friday notes last week. So our hope was that you had an opportunity to look through that ahead of time. As well as the ISD 192 framework for community engagement, which we had introduced at a previous session as well. And so I'll start with the framework and just reiterate our previous discussion, which was that as we try to establish a more consistent community engagement committee and work, there's importance for people to understand what different terms mean, and that we as a board and we as a district use those consistently so that it helps us be on the same page and it helps our community understand for each issue that that we're working on specifically, whether it's something like start times or boundaries or budget realignment, that the community understands what we mean when we say we are going to involve the public or we're going to empower the public through this issue. And so within the framework there, you can see the terms at the top, and they each have different meanings. So inform, consult, involve, collaborate, or empower. And this is something that the committee agreed we should post on our website and put some information around, like we have already with the Strategic Framework Community Companion Guide and some of those things that have helped translate the work that we're doing in more plain language for our community partners. The second thing that we talked about both as a board and a committee is that as a broad philosophy, we agree that community engagement is consistently a two-way street. So while we recognize that we have topic-specific issues that we will work with the community on, like those that I just mentioned, we always want to hear what the public's perception is of our district's strengths or questions they have or concerns. So it's ongoing, and we provide regular opportunities currently through public comment at board meetings and work sessions. We receive emails and calls frequently as board members. Jason and the admin team does as well. So just that continuous conversation is a part of always having an understanding of what the community is feeling and seeing and experiencing, and our responsibility as board members to be responsive to that. So then moving into the topic-specific issues and how the framework drives some of that work, the discussion guide really centers around the role of the committee and driving forward the recommendations that we bring to you as a board. So I'm a visual person. I like having something in front of me that I can read. Appreciate the finance committee doing the same when they put together the different models. So this is just something tangible that you can see how we talked about this as a committee. So as topics are identifying, is there a need for community engagement, target specific? Do we agree as a board and as an administration team that that is needed? And then once there's that call for community engagement around a specific topic, looking at what is the goal. So if you look back at the framework under the terminology, there is then a community engagement goal, and that describes the different levels, I guess, or what that looks like. So I have the budget alignment priorities for 23-24 open within the discussion guide. And so for the community engagement goal for this, we had that as a committee, we thought that this fell under involve. And so working directly with the public throughout this process to ensure that public needs, concerns, and aspirations are consistently understood and considered. And so, we talked about how this process happens every year, and because it's typically a lower impact, it's fallen between inform and involve, and those, as you can see in the framework, are a little different, and thanks for having that open, Kyle. But so informing is providing the community with relevant information to keep them informed about what the impact is, how it will affect them, what is considered. Consulting is gathering input from the community, so messages, we care what you think, and examples of those are public comment, focus groups, surveys. We do those things fairly routinely too. And then involve, as you can see, so the community engagement goal I just described, but then the message is your input will be considered in the solutions and alternatives developed for this issue. So as Jason said, as the scenarios and you as a committee work to bring those, put those together and what they look like, taking into account and hearing from our community about what what their concerns and hopes are as part of this process. And so you can see different example techniques within the framework, which I think is really helpful, and also ISD 192 examples that are standing. So, within each of these, you can see under collaborate, for example, we have our IPR committee, we have our Special Education Advisory Council, our American Indian Parent Advisory Council. Within our Involve, we have our standing relationship with Farmington Area Education Foundation. So I just think it's helpful to see the different examples of the ways we're already doing these things in practice, and examples of what strategies the administration, when they get to talking about the how, what they might bring forward as recommendations to us. So again, recognizing that the scope of the committee is to talk about the broad goals and strategies, and then the how that might be achieved is up to the admin team to come back to us with their recommendations for how that looks. So we identified the time frame as beginning of this school year up until the budget is finalized in June of 2023. And stakeholders, so recognizing that depending on the topic, this might be different depending on, what we're working with the public on. And in this case, this is our learners, our families with children who are currently in our district or soon to be enrolled. This is our broad community because they help contribute to our overall budget through our operating levy. So we talked as a committee about what messages we thought are most important from us as a district as part of this process. So the why behind why do we need to realign? Why are we doing this? Why is it larger than past years? What the impacts might be of different possibilities, and how this relates to our next topic that we'll talk about, which is the relationship between this and a levy referendum that we'll be talking about as a district too. How have we engaged the community around this topic in the past? So appreciate that the admin team brought forth some of the history around this. So what worked well, what was most effective. So continuously informing the public around the why has been helpful. Open communication and dialogue with both board members and admin team members being available and responsive to questions and concerns that come from community members, staff, and parents. And some of the other examples were like community roundtable discussions were had, of course, public comment, and that ongoing dialogue as this process unfolds over the course of the year. So some of the specific recommendations that we brought forward related to this are similar to the Finance Committee. So start by developing a guiding change document that is the one for the Finance Committee as far as what the changes might be, but then for the community engagement discussion, how we as a committee and a board want to translate that into our philosophy and involving the public in this work. So I'll pause there in case there are any questions or discussion around this one in particular before we talk about the other one.
The only comment I have is on the framework, generally the fine line between consult and involve, and the importance throughout all of these of kind of managing expectations. I mean, I don't disagree at all that we will consider alternatives and ideas and things like that, but at the end of the day, there will be some difficult decisions that need to be made, and there will be some people who don't feel that their ideas were considered, regardless of whether they were or how seriously they were, right? So we just need to make sure that throughout this process, I think, I agree that this is the right category, that's my point, but we just need to continue to make sure we're managing the expectations around how this all unfolds over the next several months. That's my only comment.
Yes. Yeah, that's helpful feedback. And I think that's one of our goals through our discussion is, do we have the goal right? Does this feel reflective of what's worked well in the past, or what questions we anticipate. And so hearing you say that it feels okay, but just helping to continue or to start sharing this framework too, and again, be consistent in how we talk about our work in this area with the public by using the terms like involve or consult or collaborate.
Yep, I think we're both very focused on strong communications and transparency in all of these decisions, and again, I think this reflects it well, so thank you.
Nothing else? Okay, so then moving on to the discussion guide. So as a reminder, we didn't go into this on the work session agenda tonight because we are focused on the budget realignment in terms of timeline and priority, but because the board as a whole came to a consensus that it was likely that we would need a levy referendum this coming fall, we as a community engagement committee wanted to get started on our recommendations so that any work that would need to be done, we can also get a leg up on. So if you are looking at the discussion guide then for the levy referendum in November of 2023, yes, there's a need for community engagement. And this one is, we talked about as a committee how there are different phases of these things, right? So there's an informing phase, consulting and informing, and, we care what you think, and, we'll keep you informed about why this is needed. And, but ultimately, for something like a levy referendum, the goal is empower, because we as a district will implement what the community decides through their vote. And so just wanted to provide a little background as to why this discussion guide looked a little different, and but ultimately that this is the result of what we perceive to be the goal with something that is a voter approved operating or levy referendum. So the time frame started when we started this year up until November of 2023. Who are the stakeholders? Again, all district taxpayers, our parents, our learners, our staff, what messages are most important. So connected similarly to the budget realignment, but why we might need a levy, knowing that our current one isn't set to expire until 2025. Why do we go out in 2023 for that? Helping the public understand why that's important. What are the results we are hoping to achieve from that? So how would the dollars be used? How would it help our position where we're at now, and what difference would it make for our schools and our learners? Helping the public understand how we maximized our last levy. So how did we use the dollars that they approved in 2015, and how did we spend those well, and invested in our community and in the education and the value that our district brings to our community as a whole. And then some of that historical info. So again, where we've been, where we are, where we might be going, depending on what happens with the levy. So examples of ways that the community has been engaged around this topic in the past. So we have our biannual community survey that regularly assesses community perceptions about the district, satisfaction of the quality of education, a whole variety of things. We just had that done 2020.
Yeah, we'd be due this spring
again. So that's a regular thing. We're always checking in through the community survey. Other examples that were shared by the administration team where we've contracted with a firm to assess where the community's at currently, knowing that, where they could have been for a biannual survey 2 years ago, likely very different. And so understanding how that relates to potentially a levy referendum. Connected with other districts who have more recently gone through this process. So I know just from following the news, as Jason mentioned too, a lot of districts are going out this fall, have had to, for similar reasons that we are discussing. Community information sessions, things like Q&As, reaching out to specific groups such as civic groups, PTPs, City of Farmington, other relationships that we have. Media releases and social media plans, so trying to share information in a way that reaches people in a variety of mediums where they might get their information. And then additional time for information releases. And I'll pause there and just see if there's anything that Lisa or Andrew or any of the admin team feel would be helpful to add as far as things that have worked well in the past, or if there was any, we also talked about with each of these, is there anything that we did that didn't work well or wasn't as effective that we would think as a board we should not consider again or spend time on? And I don't know if any of that came up, so. So ultimately, for the recommendation that we're bringing forward to the board is, of course, continuing to rely on the Finance Committee and their recommendations because they will be driving the what, as we've talked about, the logistics of a potential levy itself, but then how we engage the community around this. So some of the things, we're developing a community companion guide for school financing, which we've already talked about and I think is already kind of in the works, just not only because of a potential levy, but just because it's such a complicated system, trying to help our community understand the basics of it and what it means when we talk about some of these terms. What is a levy? What is a bond? What are fund balances? That type of thing.
MSBA, actually, when you're talking about community guides to school financing, I think, didn't we share
Yeah.
a video last year? MSBA has done a really good job, and it's like, not interactive, but it's videos. Just another way to consume the information. I think it was mostly
right.
focused around special education cross subsidies.
Part of our budget realignment last year, so
Yeah.
we created it wasn't quite as slick as the strategic planning framework guide, but the intent, I think, is to do something similar and
Include that
there's
video.
a couple of different videos,
Yeah.
but yes.
Yeah, that's great. And then connecting with other districts to gain insight into what's working well for them, how they're engaging their community, and contracting with a vendor again to support the process throughout the way were some of the broad strategies. So again, not to get into the how or the nitty gritty, but the high level things that as a committee felt like the right direction to move in for this topic. Anything you'd add? Sue?
No, I think our biggest discussion point is just to rely on the Finance Committee and that direction would drive then next steps for us. Other than that, yeah.
Any other questions, feedback about?
Got no more nuggets.
these? Okay. So as far as next steps for the Community Engagement Committee, we don't have another meeting scheduled at this point. I think at this point, we turn it over to the administration team if the board as a whole is in agreement with the high-level strategies and approach. And the admin team works their magic and starts to pull together the different pieces in supporting this process on a more detailed level. And, we as a board will just continue to check in with progress as the Finance Committee goes on. And if there's anything specific that we think we might need to come together around, or if the admin team needs our support or feedback, we would meet as needed and bring updates back to the board.
I'm down with that. All right. That ends our work session discussion topics. Our next items are a number of policies that are up for routine review, 407, 410, 412, 601, and 603. Let's see, who's going to lead that? Sue, okay, I got you.
I'm the winner tonight.
Great.
So, yeah, we met last on September 22nd, so regular review. And typically, I usually say, little wording changes. That's very true for policy 407 and 412. Minor wording changes to policy 407 and no changes to 412. So the intent of each of those policies remains as they were originally established. For policy 410, which is the family medical leave policy, this one saw a few wording and reference adjustments, and then one fundamental change that indicates for instructional employees that only the period of leave until an employee is ready and able to return to work should be charged against an employee's FMLA leave entitlement. And then 601 addresses curriculum and instruction goals. You probably, board members, as you reviewed this, there was some significant language added, and most of it because of legislative changes related to this policy. So Jacqueline and I talked through this in detail with the policy team, got some great perspective from Lisa, who was kind enough to educate us a bit more on this. And our current curriculum parameters already support the changes reflected in the policy, so no concerns for that. And policy 603, specific to curriculum development, does also include some enhancements to language regarding the district advisory committee on this subject. None of the policy language adjustments here require any changes to our current practices, so standard as is. Questions?
General question about some of these. Most of these, we've had a couple in the past where the board or the policy defers to the administration to come up with practices or procedures. I think some of these are probably built into the dashboard work that's either not currently on the website but is being reconfigured per our discussions this summer. But I do notice that on the policy guide, I think there, and I can talk to you offline on this, I guess, but I think we should move towards putting more of those procedures out on that policy portal as well, wherever we can. I don't know if others, there have just been a couple others where that's happened, or where that's kind of come up on other issues. The board says the administration will develop procedures around X, Y, or Z, and I think it was the grievance policy or the memorials policy last year where that became one of the first places that it was sort of obvious that it wasn't also there. So if we can kind of look through these and look for those opportunities to ensure that those procedures that are kind of alongside the accompanying policy, just to continue to reinforce that need for transparency. That's it. I think it's an oversight. Obviously, it's not nothing deliberate, but it was interesting reading over these policies. Actually, I found a couple of typos. I'm glad the one was repaired for sure. I won't get into it, but it's interesting to see how much the policy sort of reflects the current interests of the community and the state around diverse curriculum. And,
Yeah.
and I mean, it's baked in here pretty well. And so it's just a matter, I think, for the district to do a good job continuing to execute.
Yep.
Those are my random comments on policies. Anything else? Lisa's smiling. All right. If nothing else, then I guess that's the policy discussion. We'll see those again at the business meeting in a couple weeks to vote on.
Right, this was the second reading for these, right? And so they'll come before the board. Okay, for the last and final.
All right, thanks, everyone. I'm just laughing at your smile, Lisa.
And back.
All right, so the last item on the agenda is public comment. So open forum for board work sessions. Thank you. For board work sessions will be conducted at the conclusion of the meeting and must be agenda specific. Comments from visitors must be informational in nature and not exceed 5 minutes per issue. The board cannot engage in discussion or debate in those 5 minutes, but will take the information and find answers if that is appropriate. As part of the protocol, it is unacceptable for any speaker to slander or engage in character assassination or discuss student or personnel issues, including but not limited to teachers, coaches, bus drivers, principals, board members, and administration at a public board meeting. As such, speakers will not be allowed to identify district employees either by name or position during the public comment period. We had a number of people reach out beforehand, and it looks like they have also all filled out their blue comment card, so I'll just call them in order of that we received them. Julie Jacobson.
Done this before. So this is the first time I've done this.
Welcome.
Hi, Jason. Thank you. I was going to come tonight. I thought it was, and I'll be less than 5 minutes, I'm sure. I came tonight to support a lot of folks that are in the room here tonight that I've been following along with in the community. We are all one community. And I come here tonight, I don't even have a child in the district anymore. We just graduated Joe Thomas 4 years ago. And I've learned a lot of things now as a grandparent and in the work that I do and the culture of the workplace that I work in. And I know tonight that we're supposed to be commenting on the policies, and this was the first time I had the opportunity to read either of these, and I don't really understand your process, right? Because I haven't been here before. And it seems to me that the language has already been added, and then this is the final copy that you were all reviewing tonight. In your policy 603, under 3 responsibility, it says that on the, I won't read the whole thing, but on the 3rd line down, it talks about the advisory committee being a reflection of the community and to the extent possible. And that language, to the extent possible, I think could be changed to something and with measurable effort made to be more inclusive of, to reach out to people and to recruit so that we are actually being representative of the entire community. I bring all of this to you as someone who works in an organization that has adopted diversity, equity, and inclusion language into all of their policymaking. And I say this as, and this is my opinion, as a community member, taxpayer, a person who's had 4 kids go through this district, that I really think that the district is behind in keeping up with other state and local government entities that are addressing in their policy language, the need to advance. I see that in the 601 policy, that you have certain things that are just getting us there, but I think could go a little further. In terms of, well, there's no page numbers here, but in 601, we have number 5. Students will be given the opportunity to acquire human relations skills necessary to, and you have A, B, C, D, and E. And the last one, E, promote a multicultural, gender fair, disability sensitive society. And I think that additional language could be added here about diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, and what these definitions are, and what this education entails. Again, as a community member and someone who has worked for several different state and local government entities, I've been reading about how other organizations have moved themselves forward, and I know that I'm not saying anything that's new to you. I'm certain that you have all participated in these trainings, and you have an understanding of your responsibility as leaders in our community and the education of our children to become the world's best workforce. And when I first read that in 601, and I think to myself, you know, don't we really want them to be the world's best citizens? And so I want to just close with sharing a mission statement that I pulled from one of our local government agencies in Dakota County. It's not perfect, and I realize it was written by people like you and me. I'm sure that you've all participated in mission and vision writing statement activities where they bring in a speaker and you work on these activities and you develop something like this. It's not perfect, but I think that it's appropriate to share. As a system, we are committed to dismantling institutional racism and healing historical trauma. We are moving forward as a place where inclusion, respect, acceptance, growth, and teaching are expected. We will recognize our individualities. We will listen to every voice, recognize our biases, and grow towards a more equitable and inclusive culture. We will help each other learn by modeling, teaching, and listening. And that came from a community corrections agency. And I bring that to you tonight as the school board because I feel that in our community, we as parents and as leaders are the ones who need to continue modeling, teaching, and listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sarah Fry.
Hello, and my comments might actually fit very well after Julie's. First, I'd like to begin on this Indigenous Peoples Day, acknowledging that we are meeting on stolen land, and to encourage people to find the strength and the courage to learn about the uncomfortable parts of history so that we may all do better in the future. Thank you, board members, staff, and Superintendent Berg for the opportunity to speak. I would like to speak to Policy 601, Section B, Part 5E. It states a goal of the district shall be to make available the opportunity to learn the skills that promote a multicultural, gender-fair, disability-sensitive society, as Julie just alluded to. If students learn by observing their leadership, then I implore leadership to be more clear about its messages. After community members implied violence aimed at a section of the student body and staff, it clearly shows a lack of support by the school board when the response is veiled behind a personnel investigation. It would have shown support to sometimes marginalized.
Sarah, I'm afraid that wades into the area of a personnel situation, and we can't have that part of the public comment here tonight. I appreciate it.
Comment about how
You're
the
wading into a
board-
response about a personnel complaint and a personnel issue that's currently underway in our district. Per the policy and per the statement I read prior to the start of the public comment period, I need to ask you to recenter your comments around policy 601 or the other policies that were in the agenda. Thank you.
Around policy 601, which is promoting a multicultural, gender-fair, disability-sensitive society. And I'm calling on the board to condemn violent actions and community threats against students and staff. That's the bulk of my statement. I would like to see that step forward in actually condemning violent acts against students and staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Kelsey Jezierski.
I haven't stood up here in a while. I think it was, what, April the last time I was up here? I guess my name is Kelsey Jezierski. The majority of you guys know me. So hi, nice to see everyone again. So I guess good evening, board members, student council representatives, Superintendent Berg, fellow school board candidates, and those who are viewing remotely. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts that came up over the last week or two, but they do relate to the policies, I promise. So, Marian Wright Edelman, a civil rights activist and founder of the Children's Defense Fund, said, "Education is for improving the lives of others and for leaving your community and world better than you found it." To me, this speaks of selflessness and altruism. Within Farmington's policies and regulations, Policy 601, which I guess is the theme tonight, discusses school district curriculum and instruction goals. Under the long-term plan section, it states that students will have the opportunity to acquire human relation skills necessary to Objective E, promoting a multicultural, gender-fair, disability-sensitive society. And then I believe, I felt like that objective could be addressed within other goals and objectives in that same policy. So Section B, school district site and school site goals should include the following. Goal 1, all students will be required to demonstrate essential skills to effectively participate in lifelong learning. These skills include the following. Objective F, global and cultural understanding. In Goal 2, each student will have the opportunity and will be expected to develop and apply essential knowledge that enables the student to, Objective B, bring many perspectives, including historical to contemporary issues. Interestingly enough, during an endorsement screening I had last week, I was asked an interesting question that was both that I was both surprised but also heartened to hear. The question asked if I agreed that Farmington students deserve an honest and accurate education about race that enables them to learn from the mistakes of our past so they can create a better future for all. Charmingly enough, I had actually read that question wrong and thought it just pertained to just history in general. But even though I had read the question wrong, my answer still stayed the same. In all caps, absolutely. Why? Because if we did, then maybe my daughter wouldn't have had a racist gesture used towards her last 2 weeks ago, when a peer was also voicing a microaggression against her. It was about being Asian and being good at math. If we were taught history as it happened, we'd be recognizing the history of so many who currently don't learn about the history of their ancestors within the educational system. All learners would have the opportunity to understand how historical events have present-day impacts. Those quote-unquote controversial issues may not be considered controversial, but may unite us under a common understanding. How many have heard about the Tulsa Race Massacre, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and what events led up to its passage? My daughter actually learned about the World War II US-Japanese internment camps due to a research paper she did in middle school. What about the LA riots or the Tuskegee experiments? Or how, during World War II, 20 Black Americans petitioned the president to serve as pilots, which ultimately caused the desegregation of the armed forces. So what are the barriers to having courageous and vulnerable conversations? Our neighboring district in Lakeville created a specific policy addressing the teaching of controversial issues. The policy leads with the school district has a responsibility to include content dealing with current critical issues in various curriculum areas at all grade levels. Some of these issues may be controversial. The purpose of this policy is to recognize the benefit to students of the appropriate study of controversial issues within reasonable parameters. And then District 196 has a policy around not banning what are considered controversial books. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to be having these courageous conversations within classrooms, and it needs to be built into the curriculum if we want to achieve what's written in our policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There were no other requests to speak. That brings us to the end of our meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 6:46.
Second?
Motion by Doyle, second by Carrero. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, everyone.